Global Order. I'm Hindol Gupta. Jason Isaacson, an old friend of Global Order, joins me today from America. I've known Jason for a while and we've done other interviews with him. But today, especially, I want Jason to talk about one specific thing. A couple of years have gone by with the conflict that's going on in Gaza, and now, of course, the war in Iran and other kind of hostilities and protests and activities around the world and college campuses and others. I wanted Jason to reflect a little bit about what it means to be Jewish in the world today and the future of being Jewish in the world. Jason, welcome.
Hindol, thank you. It's very good to be with you again. I mean, you've touched on an extremely sensitive but really urgent issue, very much on my mind, on the mind of many of us in the Jewish community in the United States, and not just in the United States, of course. So you have to start with the perspective of a very small minority. We've always been a small minority in the world. And in my country, in the United States, we're perhaps 2% of the population. A community that has historically been targeted, been vulnerable, been scapegoated, been blamed for every possible war, disease, misfortune, accident, natural disaster. Throughout history, it's always been a convenient target because our views are our faith is different, although it's the foundation of the Abrahamic faiths. But Jews did not suddenly become Christians, and we did not accept the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. We have our own faith, grounded in our own understanding of God's creation of the world and our responsibility to follow certain commandments and certain teachings and certain ethics and values, which have been then adopted and shared by others as well. But because we were set apart by law in many places for many centuries, and seen as the other in many societies, we have been looked on throughout history with envy or with suspicion, or just simply despised and murdered. Sometimes in small numbers, sometimes in the Holocaust by the millions. So our history is a history of the people who have been hounded and have been made vulnerable and have been misunderstood, but also a history of resilience and of great kind of intellectual soundness that has been a platform for many of the advances and achievements of mankind. So it's a complicated history that is in the background of every Jew. You place us then in a time when there is anxiety in the world and war in the world, conflict in the world, misunderstanding in the world, and often motives and other kind of ill thoughts are ascribed to our people totally inappropriately, but very conveniently for those who want to take advantage of being able to cast out the other or target the other. The fact that Jews came from the land that is now Israel, on the shores of the Eastern Mediterranean, and are indigenous to that land and returned to that land, stayed in that land actually, but then returned to that land after the creation of the modern state of Israel, but are indigenous, have always lived there for millennia, is a fact that is obscured and denied by some of our enemies. So that's also part of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the fact that Israel is there and it's legitimate and it's defending its right to be there against those who would like to blot it out. And I would guess, at the head of that line is the Islamic Republic of Iran. But there are many contenders for that title who have tried throughout the last 80 years to destroy the state of Israel. And Israel has fought back because pushed into a corner, this tiny, brave people, proud people who have a right to be proud because of the achievements of this small minority throughout history, will not be destroyed, will not be chased off our land. It is the land that Jews have lived on for millennia. And what happened on October 7th, 2023, was an attempt to destroy the state of Israel, to start a war in the region where all of the friends of the proxies of Iran and of the axis of resistance that Iran created, and the Palestinian rejectionists who do not want to live side by side with Israel but want to destroy the state of Israel, thought that that would be the opportunity that they would have to finally commit that act of destruction, of annihilation. And they failed, but they caused enormous damage and trauma, a trauma that has echoed and resonated around the world, and especially in the hearts of every Jew. So Israelis are traumatized by what happened on October 7th, but so too are Jews elsewhere in the world. And yet,
let me ask you here about this about the trauma naturally that people feel. Do you think this particular, as you say, there's a whole history to this, but this particular round, as it were, of clashes, of attacks, of of the violence on October 7th and others, and subsequent clashes, of course, in what happened in Gaza and is still happening in Gaza, and of course the war with Iran. Is this in some senses a turning point, Jason? Because I ask you this because after all, this Iran thing had been going on for a long, long time. And it does seem like some shadow of this has lifted a little bit.
I'm hopeful that some shadow of it has lifted a little bit. But of course, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the rallying cry against Israel has been one of the kind of unifying causes that have been championed by the Ayatollahs, by the mullahs who rule that country, that theocracy, against the majority of the Iranian public, as we know from poll after poll. Is there a turning point now because of what's happened over the last couple of weeks over Israel demonstrating that it was not going to accept the inevitability of an Iranian nuclear weapon, and was not going to continue to endure attack upon attack, either directly from Iran or from Iran's proxies that they've funded and armed on the periphery of Israel? I hope so. I mean, I hope that the Iranian regime has been taught a lesson. I'm not sure that that's the case. I think the defiant statements that we've heard from Ayatollah Ali Khamenei just in the last few days suggest that they're pretending that they won this round, that they blackened Israel's eye and they set back the cause of the United States, the great Satan. And I guess we should expect that from dictators who will not easily confess their humiliation, but they were humiliated and they were weakened. Does that mean that we will find ourselves in a more peaceful region, that they will come to the bargaining table, with their tail between their legs and will agree to some kind of a deal that will finally conclude their nuclear weapons program? I hope so, but I doubt it. I mean, my expectation is that they will come to the bargaining table. They will insist on the right to enrich, which they believe is their inherent right under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, although it is not explicit in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that any state has such a right. And they will furtively, secretly, somehow, in some cave in that vast country, find a way to continue that program. The problem is the whole ideology of that regime. It is based on this archaic notion of what Islam stands for, which is a perversion of what Islam stands for, and it's an excuse for a tiny band of people to rob and mismanage that country and divert the wealth of that great nation toward military and terrorist ends. And that's something that, and the repression of that regime is horrendous. And what we've seen in the executions of the last few days, I guess we should have expected something of that nature from that regime, which has a long history of human rights abuses of the grossest kind. But I'm very worried about what's going to happen internally in Iran, and I think that more attention needs to be paid to that, frankly, by the international community, not just by the
Let me
United
also
States.
ask you, I understand that, there is no, perhaps like you can never entirely stop a terrorist who is determined to kill themselves also for, attacking someone else. I guess if a country is determined to try and acquire nuclear weapons, they will keep trying. But do you at least believe that it has been stalled significantly for a significant period of time? And alongside that, do you feel that now there will be a revival of the Abraham Accords, which could bring about a new, new level of participation and cooperation between Israel and other Gulf nations?
Well, two separate questions. So, do I think that the Iranian nuclear program will be somehow restarted? Yeah, I do. I think it has been set back significantly. As you know, there have been different assessments provided, some quite blustery from our president, and quite definitive, but a lot of uncertainty has been raised in other quarters, different intelligence estimates, some leaked, some more public, that suggest that certainly by months, if not by years, the Iranian military nuclear program has been set back. The president said it's been completely obliterated and destroyed. There are reasons to believe that that's probably not the case, that there are elements that survive. And there are maybe not the top scientists, but there are many other scientists in that very large country and engineers who could probably cobble something together if that's the course that they pursued. If that is the course that they pursue, and if the kind of revelations that we saw that led up to Israel's very successful targeting of sites and of individuals responsible for that program, if that continues, I expect that there's no end to the surveillance on Iran, even after the intense conflict that we've seen over the last 2 weeks. If that surveillance continues, and if that surveillance detects a restart of the Iranian nuclear program, I expect there'll be consequences, because that's not something the region can stand. And by the way, it's not only Israel that is subject to the threat of a nuclear armed Iran. It is also the states of the Gulf that are sometimes at crossed swords with Iran, have very different views of Iran's place in that region. So I'm afraid that we're going to be in for a period of testing of Iran's determination to pursue a program that we know will threaten the region and therefore cannot stand. The question of Abraham Accords expansion, I'm very optimistic about the future of the Abraham Accords and of the whole concept of Israel's integration into that region, into its neighborhood, and for all the benefits that we know can accrue to the people of the region, not only the security benefits, which we saw, by the way, on display in the beginning of the emergence of a regional security architecture that includes Israel, not only because of Israel's inclusion in the area of responsibility of the U.S. military command that's based in the naval base in Bahrain and the air base in Qatar. We saw last April and last October when Iran fired missiles and drones at Israel, and Israeli air defenses knocked those missiles and drones out of the sky with the assistance of the United States, but also France and Great Britain, and also states in the region. And the fact that Israel is in the area of responsibility of CENTCOM, which means that Israeli military officers are regularly interacting with officers from Arab states with which Israel does not have diplomatic relations. And there is intelligence sharing, as we all know. And it's already quite apparent to leaders from that region with whom I've spoken over many years of traveling to the Gulf, that Israel has a right to be there and can be a good neighbor and a good partner for these countries. And that includes Saudi Arabia, which has obviously appeared in everyone's mind as the next big, exciting possibility of establishing normal relations with Israel. Although there's also a lot of talk, as you know, in recent days about the possibility of Syria joining in a normal relationship with Israel. But if Saudi is to move forward, it has been made very clear by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, His Royal Highness, that there needs to be real progress on the Palestinian front. Progress that is not going to be easy to manage with the current Israeli government and also with an Israeli public that's still traumatized by October 7th and does not want to provide a political reward for an act of terror that killed 1,200 people on October 7th. So it's complicated. In the long term, must there be political a pathway provided for Palestinian autonomy, self-governance? Perhaps it's a state or something like a state or something that is far better than the plight that they suffer now. Yeah, that has to happen. It has to get there. There have to be some changes in Palestinian society and certainly changes in Palestinian governance. And there has to be a level of trust engendered in the Israeli people who, it's a democracy. They will vote out a government that does not, that proceeds in the absence of trust. But if we can build that trust, which is going to be a work that has to be done on both sides, on the Israeli and the Palestinian side, then maybe we can move to a place where an Israeli government, with the support of an Israeli society, a democratic Israeli society, can make the kind of gestures to provide for autonomy for the Palestinian population. But one basic thing has to happen, and that is for parents can no longer teach their Palestinian children that the path to heaven is by killing Jews, and that the Jews do not belong on this land. There has to be a definite understanding that the Jewish people are there to stay. They have been there. They are indigenous. And it certainly must be taught on both sides of that bitter divide that this land must be shared. And there has to be a way found to do that. And it can be done, but it'll be complicated. And we're not there yet. But that's the direction we want to go. And that's the direction AJC has been pursuing as well, in partnership with people in the region, not just in Israel and the Palestinian territory, but in the Gulf and in North Africa, who want the same thing and understand that the region will be better off when there's full integration of Israel into the region and when there's a political path.
Jason, this is at a political level, of course, and what you say is, of course, the most ideal situation. Of course, as an Indian, it's a situation India has always supported, a so-called version of the two-nation formula, so to speak, that, could two people, two states live side by side in peace, and that, of course, would be ideal. I also want to ask you, Jason, do you think the kind of protest that unfolded or the kind of violence that unfolded in the name of activism and so on and so forth around the world after the October 7th issue and the subsequent military action in Gaza, and of course now, the military conflict with Iran, this kind of globalization, and we keep hearing this slogan of globalizing the Intifada, so to speak. In your mind, is this also a different kind of moment? And even though the political situation might stabilize, do you foresee this kind of problems, in a sense, happening in other parts of the world, or at least this ideology being promoted in other parts of the world, that the Intifada should be globalized? And if you do, how do you think the Israeli state, and indeed, how do you think the Jewish people ought to or should or will respond to this?
Yeah, we have seen since the atrocities of October 7th, the kind of resurgence of anti-Semitism in a new way, in a new, more kind of heartless and vicious way, as Israel has responded to defend its people after what happened on October 7th. And understand, I mean, there are several things you have to sort of break down here, I think. Israel is a country of not quite 10 million people. 1,200 people were killed on that day. 251 people were kidnapped. Women, men, children, babies, grandmothers, grandfathers. People were burned alive. People were raped. People were beheaded. It was atrocious what happened. Without even getting into it even more than that, the level of trauma for that society because of what happened was intense. And then how do you react? So there were some people who were saying Israel should restrain itself as it responds, as if any society so attacked, so deeply wounded, could respond with restraint. Israel had to find those who committed those acts, and it had to find a way to release the hostages who had been held by these terrorists. But in doing so against an enemy that had been spending years and billions of dollars developing an infrastructure, a military infrastructure underneath the homes and mosques and hospitals and schools of Gaza to hide from Israeli retaliation when they would ultimately carry out massive attacks, was a complicated endeavor, was a hugely complicated endeavor. And the fact that Hamas doesn't really care about the welfare of the Palestinian people because they placed Palestinian civilians on top of their military installations so that when Israel would attack those military installations, they would necessarily kill Palestinian civilians, which would be used for the propaganda benefit of Hamas and Hamas's supporters and the misguided, misinformed and misguided supporters of the Palestinian cause, who would take advantage of the fact that Israel was killing Palestinian civilians as Israel was targeting Hamas. And that's where we are. That's where we've been for the last almost 2 years, where Israel has been doing what any country would do to defend its citizens, to defeat an army. The fact that the army has buried itself cynically under Palestinian civilians makes it extremely difficult for Israel, and then leads to accusations of war crimes that are not justified, but are exploited by the enemies of Israel, who are legion. So this is the situation we find ourselves in, and it's very easy to simplify this into oppressive colonial state is fighting the warriors who are just trying to claim their land, and in so doing are slaughtering Palestinian civilians. And that's not what's happening. But that's the narrative that has distortedly been conveyed and adopted by simple-minded protesters around the world, including in my own country. We need education. We need to clear away these misconceptions. We need a clearer narrative. Obviously, Israel needs to take greater care, but it takes enormously, it takes care beyond what armies will typically take to try to protect the civilian population when it's going about its conduct, but it's the conduct of its war. But it's inherently complicated, and mistakes have clearly been made, and this is what happens in war. It's not a simple tabletop maneuver. It's a very complicated battlefield in which civilians are intentionally put in harm's way. So, does Israel need to do a better job of explaining itself? Perhaps. But frankly, the enemies of Israel need to understand what is actually going on. The cynicism of Hamas to support a Muslim Brotherhood movement that has no regard for human rights, and that is just simply trying to destroy the state of Israel and Jews in large numbers as much as possible. I can't believe that human rights activists around the world want to be on their side. I can understand they're expressing concerns about the way the war is being conducted, and you can express concerns about the way any war is being conducted. But you have to really understand what is the nature of the two combatants, Israel versus Hamas, what their values are, what they stand for, whose rights they're trying to protect. And I hope that will lead people to a different conclusion. And so look, on college campuses across the United States, we have spoken out. We have had many consultations with university administrators, college administrators, faculty, trustees about the necessity of enforcing codes of conduct. You can have a protest, a peaceful protest against the actions of a foreign country, absolutely. But can you shout in the face of a Jewish student on his way to class or her way to class? Can you paint swastikas on the doors of Jewish students who were living in a dormitory, and say that that's somehow defending the rights of the Palestinians. It's a horrible perversion of history and a complete misunderstanding, and it's hateful. And in many cases, it's violent. And I will tell you also, as an executive of a nonprofit organization that had an event that drew something like 140 participants on the evening of May 21st in Washington at the Capitol Jewish Museum, an event to which that was attended by young diplomats from some 30 countries. It was a reception that we have had annually for young diplomats stationed in Washington, along with members of our community, to talk about issues of concern to many communities. And this happened to be an evening that was devoted to talking about humanitarian assistance across international lines, including in Gaza, and work that could be done to advance the necessity of delivering humanitarian aid to people in need around the world, but also in conflict zones, and especially in Gaza. And that two young Israeli Israeli embassy staffers were killed outside our event. Just brought home again the cynicism and the misunderstanding that is out there. This was an event that was devoted to building peace and to building understanding and to supporting humanitarian aid internationally. And yet the blind haters of Israel and of Jews, but especially of Israel, used this as an opportunity to strike out and killed two beautiful souls on that night. And then, of course, not long after that, there was the firebombing at a march in Boulder, Colorado, devoted to bringing attention to the plight of the hostages who were still being held almost more than 600 days in Gaza. So there is that crazed radicalism that is out there and that is affecting our community and making us feel even more vulnerable. And so, frankly, I will have to say maybe this one thing, Hindal, the support that our community has felt throughout this period from our Indian American friends, our Indian American partners in so many actions that we've been involved in together and supported each other, has been so important and so much appreciated. The fact that after October 7th, Prime Minister Modi reached out to Prime Minister Netanyahu and expressed the solidarity of the Republic of India to the people of Israel after suffering the atrocities of October 7th. But the fact that Indian Americans, the Indian diaspora, has reached out so warmly and sincerely to comfort and to demonstrate their solidarity with my community is something that we know and we very much appreciate. And we will be there for that community as well, as we have been in the past.
I'm glad to hear you say that. Jason, we only have a couple of more minutes left, but I just want I want to end with one small last question. In your opinion today, after all that has happened in the last more than 2 years, do the Jewish people around the world, not just in Israel, feel more secure now that, Hamas has been, in a sense, brought to its knees, Iran's nuclear facilities have been bombed, or do they actually feel more insecure considering, what happened outside your event, considering all this globalized the Intifada, movement and all of these other things that is taking this entire issue around the world? Which one do you think? Do they feel more reassured that at least some of it has been contained, or do they feel more insecure?
That's such an interesting question, Hindal, and so hard to answer. I mean, I think it's really all of the above. Yes, I think feel better about the prospect of containing, if not completely destroying, but certainly containing for a period of time, I think an extended period of time, the nuclear threat posed by Iran, for sure, because of the U.S. actions and frankly, the American actions over the last 2 weeks and last 2 days. But let's also remember that, sometimes acts of terror follow by weeks or months or even years. Instructions that were laid down in the past. We saw this in the case of Libya and the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103, which was delayed significantly, but carried out to horrible effect. And it's It's also something we know quite a lot about the network of agents and cells that Iran has placed around the world. We saw the bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires in 1992, the Amia Jewish Community Center in 1994, carried out by agents or allies of Iran, and it's not possible to be comfortable after Iran has been set back and punished for its violations of its non-proliferation agreements and its threats to its region, and it is not. It hasn't stopped its revolutionary fervor and intent has not been stifled. It is clear that they still feel the same way about the legitimacy of their struggle against the West, and Israel is very much in the front of that, and Jews as well. And there have been Jewish leaders, in addition to Iranian dissidents around the world, who have been targeted by the long arm of the Iranian terror network. So, do I feel that threat has diminished? No, I feel it has not diminished. The nuclear threat has diminished, but the terror threat, the vulnerability of our community, is something that we have to live with, and can live with the support of governments around the world and the support of sister brother communities who feel the same way about the need to combat hate, combat terror, create understanding between peoples, recognize the true teachings of the faiths to which we adhere, not the perverted teachings that have been adopted by the mullahs of Iran and by the Muslim Brotherhood, but there are ways that we can break out of those prejudices and constraints that have been imposed on us. And I'm hopeful about the future, but I'd be lying to you if I said that I feel tremendously safer today. And I think that's a feeling that is shared by many in our community. So we are looking to our neighbors and our governments to provide the education and the protection and the solidarity that will keep us all safe and our societies safe.
Jason Isaacson, thanks very much once again for walking us through all these issues and really talking in a rather heartfelt manner about all these issues that have been going on in its last edition, or latest edition, should I say, for more than 2 years now. We ended on a optimistic note to a degree, and I hope that optimism continues. Thanks very much for your time. I look forward to having you again another time to talk about these issues as all of this news advances. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Hendo. It's always a pleasure to be with you.